to all the dispossessed youth of Africa, for perpetuation of communion with ancestral spirits through the fight for African freedom, and in the firm faith that the dead, the living, and the unborn will unite to build the destroyed shrines. Greetings, family, and welcome to another episode of Wake Up Africa. My name is Dr. Mumbi. How you doing? How's everything going? Happy New Year! Happy New Year. Yes, I know. This is not our real New Year, but because the majority of Africans engage in this fake holiday, it makes it our artificial New Year, our artificial reset. But our true New Year is in September, family. And our true calendar goes by the moon cycle. So there are 13 months instead of 12. So this has been one of the greatest lies that is told. And I talk about this every year, but Happy New Year, just because all the energy is focusing on this as the new year. So even you, knowing or not knowing that this is the real new year, you can take advantage of that momentum from the collective consciousness to leap yourself forward in your objectives, in your work, etc., etc. Special shout out to Errol. He just went past the camera. That's why you saw it shake like that. So what can we look for in terms of Mama Africa in 2024? As I've told you, family, the general trajectory of Africa and the global melanated, people is rulership is returning to us. Rulership is returning to the global South. As you know, the so-called Latin America or South America and Africa are majority melanated. And so it's been prophesied, this is the season, this is the time. We are the ones who are supposed to embody the prophecy. And you can see it if you have this your first eye open, family. You will be able to see it in how the narrative is going. And one of the biggest narratives that has emerged from 2023 is this story of reparations. For so long, people were thinking reparations were a joke, but throughout 2023, I think we saw California talking about how, or whichever state in the US, you'll see it here, which side? Yeah, let me move a bit this way. You'll see it here, which talked about giving reparations to every single citizen. We saw, the British government create like a reparations committee where the descendants of slaves and the descendants of the colonized, who have now become members of parliament in the so-called House of Lords, are now taking it upon themselves to seek reparations from within the system, family. Another big thing is that not only is the British government going through that, but right up to the European Union. The European Union, members of the European, the members of the European Parliament, were forced to discuss and to initiate talks among the European Union on how they will be returning the stolen wealth to Mama Africa. And don't think that they'll be writing out a check. It's because even when we got independence, family, the reason so many African countries are in debt is by design. Because when the British and the French and whoever, they didn't even leave. As I always say, they went through the front door, turned around and came back through the side door. But they refused for African nations to go back to their kingdoms and queendoms, to go back to their nations. And instead, they put 40 nations together and called us a country. They put 2 enemy nations together and called that Burundi. They put hundreds of nations together and called that Tanzania. And they did this across Africa. And then they said, first of all, you have to get liberation as the country we've told you about. Then once you get liberation as that country, then you can now, it will be easy for you guys to go back to your nations and everything. But the colonizer is the biggest liar ever, family. Because as he was doing that, he was initiating sons and daughters of high priests, sons and daughters of the medicine men, sons and daughters, the ones that could be found, or grandsons and daughters of the teachers, indoctrinating them with a new teaching, taking them to the divided states on so-called airlifts to indoctrinate them further. And they left a very massive, heavy, debt-ridden system. So the minute one of their Masonic chosen brothers became president, they inherited a system with hundreds and thousands of workers who had been brainwashed to even hate their own, to demonize tribal culture, to see those who had remained in their nations as being ignorant, as being dumb, as being less than. And they had now taken on the so-called white superiority complex. And so the idea of us going back to our nations was quickly erased as those fake leaders now got comfortable with being the new colonizers, with being the new overlords. And they also had a lot of the debt. So it was like, oh, sorry, now that you've gained independence, you have all this, you have a government. Basically, something we've created and handed over you, the slavery tools and colonization tools which govern your mental, and you have to keep the mental going as much as you want to be free. Then you can be discussing how to separate into your nations, but you still have to keep that thing that's governing the mental. You have to keep it going until you figure it out. And then it was like, oh, but we don't have money to pay our workers. We don't have money to pay our so-called doctors. We don't have money to pay our so-called whatever, lecturers, whatever. So then now we're told, oh, we can loan you money, and in return, we come and we see what you have that we can get for that money. Because before the Mzungu left Africa, I've said this so many times, and I know there's certain men and women, especially there's a particular woman, every time I say something, she goes and remixes and makes it like her own. But as long as the message is getting out there, as long as it's getting out there, that's all we care about. But before they left Africa, they had already mapped where the gold was, where the diamonds were, and not only that, family, but one thing that a lot of people don't know is that these so-called Germans and these so-called British also brought their treasures. The so-called Nazis brought their treasures to countries like Kenya and buried them. And then those lands were turned into conservancies. Those lands were turned into animal sanctuaries. Or they outright bought that land and held onto it until now. It's funny because I was speaking with one of my enlightened friends, and he was telling me about how a lot of villages now are reporting Mzungus showing up from Europe with certain maps, and they'll go and they'll speak to the locals and they'll want to go to a certain area. And these are the maps that they were left by their grandparents' family that told them where the treasure was buried, or that told them that there were minerals, or there was gold, or there was whatever. And they're coming back to collect, but it's too little too late. Anyway, so now we got into debt and we gave our minds away. Oh, there's gold there. Oh, there's rubies there. Not asking, how did you know? But now being like, okay, we'll give you this land, we'll give you that land, you'll buy this. So that's how the neocolonialism was put in place. And now, because I told you, spiritually, it's already been done. So there is a lot of spiritual agitation where the Babylonians know their time is up, family, but they're trying to manage their exit. But there's a lot of spiritual pressure for justice to be done. So they're trying to rig the system or trick the system. This is how they show you they really don't get the system. Into like, oh, let's discuss reparations, trying to create like that energy, create that false energy like they're giving us liberation, in the hopes of getting the group consciousness of Africa to buy into that new narrative of theirs, that they're now discussing reparations and they're trying to see how they can give back to slavery, because they're seeing a big problem in the fact that major countries like Ghana, major countries like Kenya may actually collapse and go into anarchy in 2024 because there's so much debt that is owned. The people, you know, they always try and keep you like poor, but not, they don't want you to be too poor. Only certain countries do. They want to create like famine and drought. But they want you to be poor, but not too poor, but definitely not rich. Definitely not even middle class. So they try and keep you just poor. But because of everything and China coming into the mix, their major anchors, now like for the British government, their major anchors, which is Ghana and, you know, Kenya, are on the verge of collapse because they're out of balance now, because they also loaned from China, and now they're about to hit, as a nation, the nation is about to be bankrupt. And if the nation is bankrupt, the people who have been following the nation will demand for some kind of change. And the most revolutionary and radical leaders are the ones who are going to come into position. And this is what the Babylonians have been told, the Illuminati. This is what they've seen. And they fear those radicals, the Ibrahim Traorés of this world. So they're trying to manage, now we're discussing reparations. By the time for discussion is over, there needs to be transference. And what they're going to try and do, family, because the neocolonial order is still very much in place. They still own the mines. They still are the ones who are extracting and exporting uranium. They've kept corruption going, and they keep the corruption and all the poison in our societies. So they're still in full control, maybe even in more control than before we had wage slaves. So what they're going to try and now do is maintain by that control, by trying to even manage the narrative of reparations, by trying to get the group consciousness to now believe that they want to give us, you know, that break. And the only way, this is what I was actually trying to say, the only way because Babylon is broke, they don't have the money to pay us the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that they've taken from us, that they've stolen through our natural resources, that they've stolen through the human capital, all our brothers and sisters that died. They don't have in artificial famines and artificial droughts, they don't have the money to pay us. So what they'll probably try and do now is say, okay, hey, they don't even say sorry. What was it that Charles said? Deeply, whatever. I've even forgotten. That's how irrelevant he is. Deeply heartbroken or whatever. And deeply regretful. Then they'll say, because we're so deeply regretful, we'll cancel the debt of Kenya that Kenya owes the British government. And in return, they can give us a couple more mines. Or in return, they can give us this. Or in return, they also won't chase our people away, because there is going to be an exodus on both sides. That's another thing to watch out for. So for me, I see that reparations are coming. But we must look beyond the reparations that our former oppressors are trying to give us, because they don't have the resources to repay us. And look for the spiritual reparations. Because this is a spiritual injustice that was done to our people. And it can only be paid spiritually. And through these spiritual payments is when we'll get our true justice. There is no day Babylon will ever give us back what is rightfully ours, because when we rise, they fall. And we need to get that into our freaking hard heads. But those are stories for other days. Stay up, family. Stay connected to your ancestors, the Most High, and the spiritual realm, so that you can survive the year of reckoning that 2024 will be. TUKO PAMOJA.